welcome to Harvard. This is very exciting. We introduced ourselves a few minutes ago with a much smaller group, and we've grown exponentially. So feel free to get closer. We don't bite. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All good. All right. Wonderful. So hi again for everyone I've talked to. I'm Parker. I'm a senior here at Harvard College, so the undergraduate school. I study biomechanical engineering. Play on the club soccer team here. Also give tours and love to welcome new visitors to campus. So welcome, we're very happy you're here, and the tour is going to be roughly an hour. We're going to be ending near that beautiful man right there at the John Harvard statue, which you know is the Statue of Three Lives. We'll be getting to that at the end of the tour. Yeah, and this is...
Hello, my name's Nathan. I'm also a tour guide. Me and Parker give tours together very frequently. And so what else do I do? I'm a sophomore, so I'm a second year student here. I study environmental science and public policy with a specific interest in plant biology. So if you have any questions about trees, ask. I was just telling some of our guests about the trees of Harvard Yard. But yeah, so other things I do on campus, I love hiking, so I'm in the Harvard Outing Club. I take people out to the mountains that are just north of here. And what else do I do?
Basketball?
I play basketball, yeah. But not on the varsity team because I'm kind of short. But you know, I just play recreationally. And then I give tours too. But yeah, it's wonderful to have you all here, and we'll get started on our first stop.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So, just so you know, you are in the most historic part of campus. This is Harvard Yard. So, I guess the best way to start is to ask, does anyone know when Harvard was founded? Anyone have the year?
In 1636.
Look at you all.
Right there.
Yes, 1636. So you can imagine that almost 400, that's a little,
Yeah.
400 years ago.
Just about.
I can do math. Almost 400 years ago, this place has changed quite dramatically. So just to give you an idea, going back to 1636, so this school was founded as Newtown College. That's because Cambridge, Massachusetts, the town we're in now, was called Newtown, Massachusetts back in the day. So this school was founded by members of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So you can imagine this is over 100 years before the United States of America has been established as a country. So, you know, some of the first American settlers came over to the east coast of what then became the United States. And so they found Newtown, Massachusetts. They founded this school, Newtown College. And that's all 1636. Remember that date because we're going to be coming back to it when we talk about John Harvard.
Okay.
Cool. So fast forward 2 years, it's 1638. A man by the name of John Harvard, an English clergyman, sailed over from England and set up shop right here on the land we're standing on. So he had his estate and farmland, and this was all in 1638. That same year, a quite unfortunate event took place. John Harvard actually passed away of tuberculosis. And in his will, he donated his land, which we're currently on, his farmland, as well as his entire book collection, which I believe 426 books were donated to Newtown College. So to honor John Harvard, they renamed the school Harvard College.
Oh.
Cool.
Okay.
So now we know.
Cool.
Yes. All right. Wonderful. So that's all 1638. So I always like to ask, if we took some of the members of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the original founders of the school, had them stand right where we're standing today and look around, what do you think they would be most surprised about? Any guesses?
The bricks.
The bricks? That's a good guess. Yeah, definitely. There were not this many buildings. Maybe the trees, like this guy can talk about.
Yeah.
Maybe that big pink bus over there. They did not have those back in the day. Sorry? That's a wonderful answer. Yeah. And even more specifically, I would say having women on campus.
Oh.
So yeah, for quite a while, Harvard was an all-male institution. And so founded in 1636, it wasn't until 1879 that any sort of step forward for men and women to go to school together here at Harvard first happened. So for that long, it was an all-male institution. In 1879, down the road, a school was established, later renamed Radcliffe College. So from 1879 and on, there was Harvard, which was the men's college, and Radcliffe, which was the women's college down the road. Fast forward a little bit farther into history, and we were in the year 1940, the 1940s, 1943, I believe to be exact. So a lot of men from Harvard were off campus. Any guesses as to why?
Yes, because of war.
The war,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
The World War. So that was when they first had women come to Harvard and take classes, and from then on, men and women have taken classes together. Fast forward 20 more years, it's the 60s.
We're just fast forwarding.
We're
That's
fast
cool.
forwarding, you know.
Spark notes version
Spark
of history.
notes, exactly. A lot of history, by the way, so feel free to ask questions at any point. So we're in the 60s, so very revolutionary time for America, right? You know, hippie movement, all of that. You know, all the old rock bands and all of that. Harvard was still a quite conservative institution, and that was the first time that they thought for men and women to live together on campus. So in the 60s, they had something called the Great Experiment, where they brought men from Harvard over to Radcliffe to live with the women at Radcliffe. They brought 100 women from Radcliffe to Harvard to live with the men at Harvard, who knew that college-age men and women enjoyed living together, and ever since then they have moved to have, you know, all of the housing on Harvard be co-educational living spaces. So you're probably wondering what all these buildings around us are. Most of these are freshman dorms. So your first year coming into undergraduate school, you're randomly assigned up to, I believe, 5 other roommates. You fill out a little survey saying, you know, a bit of your interest and preferences, and then you're put into one of these dorms. So I lived in Sivir Hall. Corny joke, I lived over Thayer. You'll get that one. And so yes, all of these are freshman dorms. What else am I missing, sir?
We'll talk a little bit about the buildings that aren't freshman dorms.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit of background on me, I lived right there on the corner of Matthews Hall, which is this like Gothic looking building. And so I was right on the corner on the first floor, and I was across from a very important person in our university president.
Oh.
So our president, Lawrence McCow, actually lived in this building right here. This is Massachusetts Hall. It's the oldest building on campus. It's the second oldest collegiate building in the entire United States. So it was built in 1720. They just spent all summer renovating it, so I imagine it's really nice inside. But yeah, our president, Mr. McCow, he lives right in there. So I had to be very aware of how loud I was being when I was throwing parties, but not as aware as the 25 lucky or perhaps unlucky students who live on the 4th floor of Mass Hall. And so a lot of people tell you that Lawrence McCow and his staff select these students based on how quiet they list themselves in the housing preference form. But I've known a few musicians who've lived there, so I don't think that's true necessarily.
It's also said that the president handpicks the most well-rounded, talented, attractive students to live above them. But we know that's not true because
Parker wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. Still mad about that.
Yeah. So yeah, this space is almost entirely residential, but there are a few buildings where students don't live in. So students obviously only live in part of Mass Hall, and then there are 2 other buildings that are non-residential. I think one of them is really obvious if someone would like to take a guess.
Library?
Well, guess which building may be
right
non-residential.
around that building.
This one?
The white one, exactly. So
The
that
white
building
one.
there is way too nice, I would say, to be a freshman dorm. That's where all of the college's administrative offices are,
okay.
including a bunch of people who affectionately, if you guys could just move in a little bit
just
to let
for
this
the
car
truck.
pass by. So there's an office in there where we affectionately call the ad board. That's the administrative board. They handle all discipline for the college. So if you're called into University Hall, it's probably not a good thing because they think you've done something wrong. Once I gave a tour to the entire staff of University Hall, but I didn't know that they were the people who worked there. I just thought they were random like staff members. So I was like, it's a bad thing if you're in University Hall. And they were like, we work there. But yeah, that's University Hall, non-residential building. Another non-residential building is right here. That's Harvard Hall. It's a classroom building. Everybody takes classes in Harvard Hall, but really interesting kind of history behind Harvard Hall. So, Harvard Hall, originally built in 1642, only 6 years after our college was founded. And it was originally built down there, but they did a really crappy job because they had no money back then, and Harvard was a really, really small school. There was only like 50 people enrolled in the college. So they built it entirely out of wood and very badly. And so it immediately started rotting because when you have a bunch of snow falling and melting all the time, that's not really good for wooden structures. And so they had to demolish it, rebuilt it in 1677 right here, but that wasn't the end of Harvard Hall's bad luck. Less than a century later, in 1764, right? Yeah, I think so. 1764, there was a tragedy that happened at Harvard Hall, perhaps the most tragic thing to ever happen at our university. It was a dark and stormy night, the night of January 22nd. There was a lot of snow falling, it was bitterly cold, and there were a lot of people in Harvard Hall trying to warm up. And these weren't just any Harvard College students, it was actually the entirety of the Massachusetts General Legislature. So all of the important political figures in Massachusetts who would normally be downtown were at Harvard, actually because there was a smallpox epidemic that they needed to get away from downtown Boston because they didn't want to get sick. However, they couldn't avoid the weather, so they're all heating up in Harvard Hall, you know, lighting fires and the like to warm up, and at some point during the night, one of these guys knocks over a candle or a lamp or something flammable, it's unclear, and the entire building burns down. And this was terrible, not because anyone was hurt, everyone was actually able to make it out in time, but rather because every single one of John Harvard's possessions he gave to our school, including over 400 books that he gave us, were lost in the fire, or so they thought. So as they were pouring through the library records of this completely burnt out building, they found that there was one book that had been checked out of the library at the time. It was a book, it was a little bit of light reading entitled This Christian Warfare Against the Devil, World, and Flesh. It was checked out by a student named Ephraim Briggs, and he was a really, really slow reader. Because he checked it out on a 2-week library lease and had this book for over 4 months by the time that the building burned down. So normally, thanks, Caitlin.
So it's a birthday today.
Of course, yeah, it is.
Happy birthday to you.
He's 45.
I look young though. But anyways, yeah, so Ephraim Briggs, he had this book and they tracked him down and they were like, Ephraim, where the hell is this book? We need it back. And he gave it to him. And normally that would be like keeping a book that long would be like a reason for expulsion back in the day. But they didn't expel him because they were so thankful. And nowadays that one book is the single thing that we have that John Harvard left us. And it's our rare books library that's actually open to the public. But you can't see that book because, you know, it's tightly locked up. But we'll pass by it soon.
Okay.
Yeah. That's about it though, right?
Yeah, well, really quickly, I also realized in this whole story about women coming and being fully a part of this campus, I sort of haven't fully finished it. So we left off in the 60s, all these dorms were starting to become co-ed living spaces. So now men and women were taking classes together, living together. Sort of Radcliffe College over there was just sort of, you know, it didn't really have any function anymore, you know? Everyone was going and living at Harvard. So in 1999, Radcliffe College was fully dissolved as an institution. We still have certain ties and associations with Radcliffe, but I just want to take a second and think that's pretty crazy. We're at Harvard. Harvard has an amazing reputation as one of the leading global institutions, but 1999, that's only, 20 years ago, That's a bit crazy to think, you know, with such a leading, you know, high reputable school. I think that's a bit late to the game, no? That's just an interesting thing to think about in our history, but sort of a nice thing that I like to end this whole story on is when our first female president of the university, President Drew Faust, she was elected in 2008. She served a 10-year term. She actually just finished her term at the end of last year. So in the fall semester, the new president, Larry Bacow, was first inaugurated. It was a huge, extraordinary event. But President Drew Faust did amazing things for the school. She revamped the financial aid program, which is, you know, very generous. I would not be here if it were not for Harvard's financial aid program. And most of my fellow classmates can say the same. Yeah, watch out for FedEx. Those were also not there in the 1600s. And yeah, so that's President Drew Faust. She also worked, and her faculty worked in Massachusetts Hall here. We've thrown a lot of information at you.
Yeah.
Are there any questions about anything? Yeah.
What are the requirements to be the president of Harvard?
Requirements to be president?
You should be smart.
Yeah, you gotta be smart, I guess.
Do you have to be a faculty member or?
I do not believe you have to have been a faculty member in the past. I believe most who are elected as president have had some association with Harvard and the organization beforehand. Hey buddy, but I don't think it's necessary.
No, not necessary.
Yeah.
Our new president, so they just went through this process of selecting a new president. He was actually, I think, president of Tufts University, which is like 25 minutes away, before he was president here. Yeah, and he was also on like the board of directors for, I think, Harvard's endowment. So I guess he was connected with the school.
Are you trying to become president? Is that why you're asking?
Yeah. All right, wanna head over?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll head over to the Science Center now. Kind of talk about a space that looks completely different. You guys know the Science Center, so we're just kind of heading back from where we came from.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're out here. This is the Science Center Plaza. It looks very different than where we once were. The way I like to think about the Science Center Plaza is it joins the social, academic, and like living kind of aspects of Harvard. We came from a very residential area. All behind me, these are almost exclusively academic buildings. And then the Science Center Plaza is where life happens. You see we have this like winter fest, which is admittedly not that fun, but it is still fun. And really when you can see Science Center Plaza come alive is in the summer. When there's warm weather, you can see hundreds of people out here during the day doing everything from studying to like playing like ping pong or doing like crazy stuff. So I just hang out here all the time, and it's cool to just sit in a chair and your friends will pass by going to classes all day. Just say hi to everybody. But yeah, it's probably the most important building out here in the Science Center Plaza is, of course, the Science Center. You all have been in there.
Yeah.
For H-Pair, it was built by this guy, Joseph Louis Sert. Kind of a random, useless fact. But it has everything you'd expect in like a college academic building.
Quick interjection. So he was the dean of the Graduate School of Design, which is right there. You can see a little glimpse of it, that concrete building.
Yeah, the concrete
So
building.
all architecture students, landscape architecture, all that. So he was the dean of the school. Back to you. Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, that's the Science Center Plaza. This is the Science Center. It really has everything from a library to lecture halls, classrooms. Yeah, I really like the Cabot Science Library, which is on this side of the building. Kind of a chill place to do work, or not really do work.
Working.
Yeah, you can see them. But yeah, what do you have to say, Parker?
What do I have to say? Well, I guess while we're here, we can talk a bit more about the academic structure of Harvard. And also, we've gotten a bunch of different questions individually about graduate programs.
Yeah.
So just to preface this, we're mostly talking about the undergraduate experience, academic experience. I guess also to say though, they're very similar. Harvard is a liberal arts college that prides itself on giving all its students a very well-rounded education.
Does everyone know what liberal arts is? Kind of?
Not specific, but
Okay.
I don't either.
I can. That's the point, though. That's the point. So liberal arts, there's nothing that is liberal arts. It's this philosophy of education, very common in America, that just emphasizes a broad course of study. Of course, you're going to have your major, or as we call it at Harvard, your concentration, but you also have to fulfill this program called the Gen Ed program that Parker can talk a little bit more about. Sorry for stealing the spotlight for a sec.
He looks good in the spotlight, doesn't he? So even though I study engineering, I have taken so many classes in, so many different fields. Like I brought up the Graduate School of Design because I'm quite interested in architecture. That's a graduate school. I'm an undergraduate. I've taken 3 courses with graduate students taught by graduate professors. Graduate students can take undergraduate classes, and so it's sort of cool. I'm taking a class this semester at the law school that is co-taught with the divinity school. It's a philosophy course. I have Buddhist monks in my class. I have 80-year-old grandfathers in my class. It's a whole plethora of different students coming together to learn together. One of my favorite things about most of the classes I've taken is that they're very small and intimate class settings. You find yourself sitting at a table with 10 other students and a leading faculty member in the field, just sort of having an open discussion about any certain topic. All that to say, we also do have the huge 600-person lecture halls and big classes like that. We're actually about to head over to one of those lecture halls in a bit, so we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, we've talked about the liberal arts education a bit. It's sort of well summarized in a quote from a past president of the college, President Lowell, who said that a well-educated man should know a little bit of everything and one thing well. So the little bit of everything sort of constitutes this general education requirement, which we have. So you have to take classes it's changed since I've been a freshman, but I believe 6 general fields. So they have fancy names, but you can sort of boil them down to a history class, a ethical philosophy class, a science class, mathematics class, United States history class, world history class, and that's the general gist. So
CS50.
Sorry?
CS50.
CS50. No, that's the class I was talking about that we're gonna
Cool. Okay.
head near next, so I can talk about that more.
By J Mallory.
I took it. Yeah.
Oh, you took it.
Yeah. So that's. What do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of that you did great, Mark. Wonderful. I couldn't. I don't know. I don't even have anything to say. One thing I want to emphasize though is just like there's no real restrictions on what courses you can take at Harvard. So you can, as long as sometimes you need to submit petitions for courses, but you can really go into any department. One of the coolest classes I took here last semester that I think is pretty kind of like indicative of that flexibility was this class on hip hop production.
Oh.
And it was taught by someone like his Professor Ninth. His name's Ninth Wonder, like his producer name. And he was just like the most really like he's probably one of the best professors I've had because he's really knowledgeable. It basically had like this knowledge of music that is unparalleled from like 1900 to the present, and it just kind of emphasizes how there's all these different things to study, not necessarily in a traditionally academic like sense of the word. Like this guy just thinks about music all day long and makes it, and is just like one of the smartest people I've ever had the blessing to talk to, and it was just like an eye-opening class for me.
Cool.
And part of the general education program. Yeah. So yeah, we'll head over to Memorial Hall, which is this big building here.
Before we head over?
Yeah. Any questions before?
I think it. Did it used to be a church?
That's not yet.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry, bro.
I mean, I see something new and I'm just so in awe, so gorgeous. So, back to the question I said I was going to ask. What do you think this was originally built for? Any ideas?
Church.
A church, right? It has, the Gothic architecture of many churches from the time. So it's actually a trick question. So this building is totally secular, meaning that it has no religious affiliation. And this was sort of the first part that was built, and it is the Memorial Hall Transept. So it was built as a memorial for the Harvard affiliates who fought and passed away in the Civil War. But a little stipulation to that is that it was for the Harvard affiliates who fought and passed away fighting for the preservation of the Union, which you can read up there. So only those who were fighting for the North. And so it was built in, so are we all American Civil War? Should I talk on that for a few moments? Or does everyone feel like they, I never know, yeah, cool, we're good? All right, hand that to you.
All right, yeah, so Parker mentioned that this is the transept, and someone taught me this on a tour I gave a little bit ago. So a transept is a part of what you would normally think of as a church. So a lot of cathedrals are laid out in the style of, architecturally they're similar to like the Christian cross. And so the transept is the part, it's like the cross, the horizontal part of the cross. And so this area is horizontal, and it kind of unites the three different parts of Memorial Hall. And this transept is, of course, the space that does serve as the memorial. So those soldiers that Parker talked about that fought and died in the American Civil War, which was like in the 1860s, those names are all the names that surround us here. And so this is the transept. It's in the middle of Memorial Hall. Over to this side of Memorial Hall, like right across this wall, is a freshman dining hall. Can't go inside, but even I can't go inside, so I can't eat any of my meals there anymore. But I think this is a good thing for the freshmen here on campus, because it allows them to have a space that's uniquely their own. And Harvard's made of people from all over the world, so when you come here, chances are you won't know anyone or really have any friends, and so it's really nice to be able to kind of be forced to meet people, but it's easy when you're surrounded by a buffet of food and stained glass like this.
Who's seen Harry Potter?
Hogwarts?
Yeah, Hogwarts?
Looks a little bit like Hogwarts.
Cool.
Yeah, it looks remarkably like the Great Hall of Hogwarts, where they have their meals.
Okay.
And that's actually not just a coincidence. So Annenberg Hall is designed after the building in England, Christ College, where those shots were filmed.
Oh.
So yeah, you could say it's a bit magical in there.
Yeah.
Like Nathan said, it's a really key part of your freshman experience is going to Annenberg, having your meals there, making new friends, sort of chatting about what they're up to, what they're getting introduced to on campus, which I guess is a good time to talk a bit about extracurriculars at school. So we talked a bit about the academics, but despite the sort of myth that Harvard students are always studying and in the library, that is not true. We also like to have some fun outside of the classroom. Harvard actually has the most NCAA Division I sports teams out of any American university. It's pretty cool. So while you think we're all nerds, we can play sports too.
Also, lifting weights.
We're athletes too. We have over 400 extracurricular clubs and organizations on campus. Everything spanning from the Harvard Beekeeping Society.
They just grow bees, basically.
I only know this because I lived near where they would meet.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah, dangerous. To debate groups, political groups, different musical associations, which I guess is a cool sort of segue to this part of the building over here, which is Sanders Theatre. So Sanders Theatre is a beautiful, very similar architecture to this. It's a beautiful semicircular amphitheater, globe-style amphitheater. It's one of the largest lecture halls on campus. So when you're talking about CS50,
Yeah.
which is the Introduction to Computer Science course, you get 600 plus students
Yeah.
per semester. That's taught in Sanders Theater. Oftentimes lectures will start with a DJ playing music.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
that
yeah,
thing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I taught that 2 years ago. Very well taught class. Actually, before coming here, in an English class I had in high school, we watched lectures from a Harvard class that was taught in Sanders Theater. So it was pretty unbelievable when I first actually got to step in there. They have a lot of sort of welcome ceremonies when you first come in as a freshman in Sanders Theater. Why I was bringing it up is I actually went in for the first time to watch an a cappella jam. So another movie shout out, but has anyone seen Pitch Perfect? Yeah?
Pitch Perfect.
All right, so you know that a cappella, Harvard has a plethora of a cappella groups. You're in one, correct?
My roommate is
Your
in one.
roommate is in one.
Likes him.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a great singer as well. But yeah, so that was the first time I was actually in Sanders Theater. It has wonderful acoustics, so a lot of different orchestras, and I believe the Philharmonic was performing there last night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time I was ever in Sanders Theater was also for a musical performance. It was the Freshman Talent Show, which is just this really wacky show that the freshman class puts on the first week of school here. So in your first few days at the college, everyone's asking you to like perform in a talent show, and I didn't perform because I don't, I'm not a good singer, unlike what Parker says. But there are a lot of really cool people who have like really special talents, and I think that's kind of like a theme like in higher education, especially at Harvard. Like there are a lot of people who are doing really cool things. So there was a guy who was performing. His name's Aaron. And I didn't know him at the time. All I knew was that he lived across from me in Matthews Hall, my freshman dormitory, and that he seemed kind of weird actually. But you know, I wasn't gonna make any judgments. It was like the third day of school, and it said that he was gonna be playing piano on the brochure that we got about the talent show, and it didn't say anything else. So I was really curious about what kind of piano he was gonna play. And so I was like very eagerly watching him, you know, walk up onto the stage, just him and a grand piano. 1,400 people watching him, and he just proceeded to play like the most insane experimental jazz piano piece I've ever heard. It was like the most beautiful thing ever. And now Aaron is my roommate. I literally share like this crowded double with him, and he's playing piano all the time.
Oh,
It's good though.
That's cool.
I'm not bothered by it. But yeah, it just goes to show that you can really meet people through these activities, and it's great because, as Parker said, there's like such a diversity of extracurricular activities, and it's easy to found a club too. Like when I was in Annenberg last year, one of my friends, he really likes juggling, so he wanted to found the Harvard Jugglers Society, and you just need like 40 signatures to found a club. So he was literally walking through the dining hall, juggling kiwis, and asking people to like sign up on the sheet of paper. I signed up, and they're not a very active club. I'm kind of waiting for the first email. But nonetheless, I am a proud member of the Harvard Juggling Society. Yeah.
So there are 1,400 students.
There's roughly, so in the undergraduate school, there's a little less than 7,000 students.
Okay.
So it's somewhere around 1,600, 1,700 students per class.
Oh, okay.
So say while we're at Annenberg, you could be in a dining hall with if your entire class was there would be 1,700 or so students eating together in this
Okay.
Hogwarts-like cafeteria.
Yeah.
So that's the undergraduate college, which is what we are a part of. But there's also all the different graduate schools.
Yeah.
So most of those, by the way, are in this general direction. So when we were talking about the Science Center sort of being the buffer between the residential side of campus and the academic side, most of the graduate schools are out on the other side. So the law school, divinity school, many of the engineering and science graduate programs. The business school is on the other side. So all this to say, the medical school also is in downtown Boston, so a bit separated from campus. All this to say, when you add up the graduate students as well, it's somewhere closer to 30,000. students. So there's more graduate students than undergraduate students.
And
Okay.
that's a great, like kind of segue, because there are 1,400 seats in Sanders Theater. There's 1,600 people per class at Harvard undergraduate, and so the original purpose of Sanders Theater actually, wasn't for the freshman talent show or anything like that. It was actually originally created to have the graduation ceremonies there for Harvard College. But as our school has gotten bigger, we can't even fit all the people who are going to graduate, let alone all of their families and friends. So we've moved from Sanders Theater over to another place called Tercentenary Theatre that can hold over 20 times the number of people we can fit in here. And we're going to be heading there soon.
stop.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Also, really quickly, I want to bring up just time-wise, we are at
It's
4
at 4,
o'clock.
yeah.
So we technically started at 3. We started a bit later.
Yeah.
We have a lot of info and history and fun facts and experiences that we want to share with you. So I think we're going a bit over. Should we rush and?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
It's going well.
Just, you won't hurt our feelings if you have somewhere to run to. Feel free to peel off. But yeah, sorry about that. We want to give you all the info.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So let's head to Tercentenary Theatre. To Memorial Church, this beautiful building here. So we're coming from Memorial Hall. We're now at Memorial Church. You see that this is sort of a theme. Since Harvard has such a long history and specifically has had so many students go off and fight in various wars, there's many memorials around the campus. Harvard actually, after the 2 service institutions, or all the different military academies, has the most soldiers who have fought and passed away in wars fighting for the United States. So, this is Memorial Church. It was first built
In the 1920s, I believe 1927.
Yeah.
And so it was built then to honor first the Harvard soldiers who fought and died in the First World War. And since then, there have been memorials added for the Second World War, the Vietnam War, and the Korean War. And this building is actually open to the public, so you can enter through that door over there. It's super beautiful inside. We just can't bring tour groups in because we can't be like shouting in a church, understandably.
Go check it out after.
But definitely check it out. And yeah, so before we left Memorial Hall, I mentioned that we were going to move on to a space where we hold our graduation ceremonies or commencement. And so this, in fact, is where Harvard's graduation ceremonies take place. This entire area is called Tercentenary Theatre, and that's named after the 300th anniversary of Harvard. So quick fact check, what year would the 300th anniversary of Harvard be?
1936.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, okay, we're paying attention. But yeah, so in this, were you gonna say something, Parker?
I was just going to say paying attention and I'm good at math.
Oh yeah, good at math too. But yeah, so Tercentenary Theatre is called a theater, kind of a weird name for it, because this, in fact, is the stage. So right about here is where like Mark Zuckerberg and our fancy people who speak at our commencement talk to literally 20,000 people gathered. And it's a really special time on campus. It happens in late May, our graduation.
May. So picture the flowers are blossoming. No snows on the ground.
And Parker is sitting right in the front,
Yeah.
receiving his diploma.
Yeah. A few months, hopefully.
But yeah, so the first time I actually experienced Harvard's graduation wasn't as a student here, definitely not as a graduate. I was actually in high school. I was like 13 years old, and my high school had a volunteering requirement. So in order to graduate and go on to college, I needed to like volunteer a number of my time, like a number of hours of my time. And so one option for this was volunteering at Harvard's commencement, and I was very interested in doing this. Not because I was actually even considering Harvard. I had no idea I wanted to go here, but rather because it was an all-day event. So I knew if I signed up, I'd be able to skip school for the day to come here. So I signed up immediately. Got here in the morning, and it was actually kind of stressful at first because I was one of 25 ushers. So I was showing people to their seats, and if you can imagine 20,000 seats not only set up here, but set up in areas of the yard that you can't even see the stage from, and they hang enormous flat screen TVs from the trees, and then they live stream it to those people. So there are people everywhere. And I had to show everyone to their seats, and I was freaking out at first. But very quickly, you know, all of that stress went away because it's like just an amazing time on campus. You have people from all over the world, people from all different walks of life gathered for like one thing, and that's to see their loved ones graduate what have been, you know, 4 amazing, transformative, difficult years at Harvard. And just kind of being swept up in that emotion was the first time I really thought maybe I should, you know, apply. And, you know, now, hopefully, in 2.5 years, I'll be graduating like Parker will be doing in the spring. Yeah.
Which, so one thing we forgot to mention near our first stop, so you can't see it from right here, but the main sort of gate of Harvard, the flagship gate, the oldest one, the largest, the most beautiful, the one I would recommend you taking all your pictures at. We don't, like, a lot of universities have a big sign that says, you know, the university where you can take your picture. Harvard doesn't really have that, unfortunately. So I always recommend Johnston Gate, which is right over there. We'll be able to see it. I'll point it out again when we're at John Harvard statue, just so you know. But the Johnston Gate has a graduation myth surrounding it. So the idea is that you're only supposed to walk through Johnston Gate twice as an undergraduate student. Once on your first day of freshman year moving in, entering into these 4 years of Harvard, and the second time after graduating here in Tercentenary Theatre, walking out, looking back, reflecting on, you know, your amazing experiences and time here. And if you walk through the gate any more than those 2 times, you are doomed not to graduate.
Oh.
So
Did you do
I actually forgot to walk through it my freshman move-in day. So I'm gonna walk out, hopefully, when I graduate, which is sort of a weird loophole, but hopefully I graduate and it doesn't curse me.
So I also forgot. I had no idea. When I came to campus, I lived like, oh, thanks, Greg. Yeah, that's my other roommate, Greg. But Greg's cool. Everyone say hi to Greg.
Hi, Greg.
But yeah, Greg is a chemist, so he's very, very smart. And so when I first came to Harvard, I live in Boston, so I actually moved in on the subway. So I had all of my bags on the train, and then the subway station is closest to the gate that's on the other side of campus. So when I came out, I went through that gate, and then someone was like, dude, you went through the wrong gate, you're not gonna graduate. And I was like, oh no. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I graduate. But I'm kind of nervous. The other day, I was walking to go get some food in the square, and the gate was open, and I'm like walking towards it, and I literally like stopped myself, and I'm like, oh, I need to go through another exit. So people do like kind of pay attention to that. Yeah.
I guess just to give you a bit more of an understanding of this whole yard and these different buildings. These are all academic buildings. Robinson Hall, that building behind the trees, is home of the history department, a very big department here. 2 of my roommates are currently writing senior theses for their history degree. This right here is Sivir Hall. It's actually a National Historic Landmark, built by a famous architect. You'll find a lot of introductory humanities and language courses taught in Sivir. Also, if you have a buddy, come back after the tour, go on opposite sides of that entrance arch and whisper into the brick, and you'll be able to hear each other from the other side, the whispering arch.
If you have any secrets to tell, that's the place to
That's
do
the
it.
spot. And then behind that over here is Emerson Hall, home of the philosophy department. I don't know if you know the name Ralph Waldo Emerson, very famous American philosopher. So he was a faculty member, a professor here at Harvard, and you can go in there. You'll see a statue of him, and pretty cool that Ralph Waldo Emerson, someone who I've heard a lot about, read a bit from, has a building and used to be a teacher here. Also, I just like to always talk about, it's snowy right now. You don't see a lot of people hanging out outside, but this, in the warmer months, is a really cool spot to come and hang out. You'll see people throwing a frisbee and football around, just sort of lounging, doing work out here. Very cool, sort of the quintessential college experience. Right next to this beautiful sort of landmark on campus.
You guys have a Harvard cat, right? The Harvard cat, and it has
yeah, Remy.
and it has its own social
Yeah.
network account, like
Does
on
anyone else know Remy the cat? Oh, there's this cat it's an orange cat, and it just hangs around Harvard. And it's just the cutest. It came into my room once, like it followed me into my dorm, but it's owned by this like random guy who lives like around here. And he just hangs out at the humanities building, so they call him Remy the humanities cat. He's like my best friend. Yeah. But yeah, so one other building that we have not yet mentioned that is perhaps one of the most important buildings at Harvard, which is literally right across from us, right there.
Library.
That is the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library. It is the biggest library in the Harvard library system, and we have a lot of libraries at Harvard. Well, we have over 70 worldwide, and that is the biggest one. It has millions and millions of books in it.
Yeah.
And our next stop will be right over underneath the steps. We'll learn a little bit more about the building, but before we go there, does anyone have any questions?
That Harvard doesn't just throw you out and make you find your own housing, which is like many other universities. You know, you live on campus your freshman year, then move off campus and sort of do your own thing. 98% of Harvard students, at least undergraduate students, live on campus all 4 years.
Wow.
So after your freshman year in the yard in a freshman dorm, you choose up to 7 other friends to block with, is the term. And then again, sort of Harry Potter style, you're randomly sorted into an upperclassman house. So if you remember back to when we were talking about Radcliffe, what used to be the women's college, they actually transformed some of that space into what is now upperclassmen houses. So there are 3 upperclassmen houses down the road a bit this way on the Radcliffe Quad, and then all the other upperclassmen houses are near the Charles River over in this direction. So we both are lucky enough to be living in river houses. I live in Quincy House, which is named after President Josiah Quincy, an old president of the college. We're going to talk a bit more about that on our next stop. But yeah, it's a cool sort of way. So after your freshman year, when you're sort of with your entire freshman class, you're eating in Annenberg, you're living in the yard, you're sort of in this general area, sort of paradise. After that, you move on, and you're in the big leagues. You're with sophomores, juniors, and seniors, the 3 upperclassmen years, living together. Each house has a dining hall, has a lot of different common space. So a lot of different events and social gatherings, study breaks, all of that is found at the upperclassmen houses. So it fosters a lot of community.
Yeah. And I live in Adams House, which is named, I think, after Josiah Quincy Adams.
Yes.
Who
Son of
was
Quincy.
son of John Adams.
Yeah.
John Quincy Adams, yeah. And so, yeah, Adams is the best house, better than Quincy, and we beat Quincy in basketball last night. So, to talk a little bit more about this library right here, this is, as we can read, the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library, founded in 1914. And that date, 1914, is a pretty important date because on my tours I used to say, oh, it was, founded in 1912 because that's when they started construction. And then one day there was a guy who was really mad at me and he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. This building says it was actually 1914. And I was like, oh man, I guess I have to make that clear on all of my tours from now on. But anyways, yeah, it was started in 1912, built in 1914, and named after a man, Harry Elkins Widener, who graduated in 1907. And Harry was a guy who really, really enjoyed books. It was kind of his lifelong dream to build a library. And he, of course, graduated with a degree in literature. And so right when he graduated, he was from a pretty wealthy family who funded his trip and private vacation to go to Europe for 5 years and just spend all of that time collecting rare books and rare manuscripts. So from 1907 to 1912, when this library was actually began construction, Harry was just collecting books in Europe, having the time of his life. But you know, all college graduates eventually need to get a job. I know if I spent 5 years bumming around Europe, my parents would probably disown me. But Harry was fortunate enough to, you know, be able to do that. Yeah, sure.
So just to add a little more detail, so the Widener family was like top 5 wealthiest families in America.
Super rich.
From Pennsylvania. And they wanted their son to sort of carry on the legacy and family business. So you can imagine that after a few years of just traveling around Europe, partying and collecting rare books, they were like, all right, you got to come back and you know, sort of get your life together. So now we find ourselves in
1912. And so in order to smooth this transition over, because you know Harry's been partying for 5 years straight, he doesn't want to go back and get a job, so his parents actually went to Europe to come grab him and bring him back to America.
Over for this
Yeah,
bar,
just come
please?
in a little bit.
Yeah.
And so his parents, Harry and his parents, they spent around 5 months, and just come in, guys. We should be good now. Yeah, thanks. So they spent around 5 months just spending time together in Europe, collecting books as a family, you know, just regular family activities. And then by the end of those 5 months, they decided to go back to America. And you know, at the time, 1912, there's no real commercial air travel. You know, the plane was invented like 10 years before that. So there's no, you know, JetBlue or anything like that, or American Airlines. So really the only option that I know of to, you know, get across an ocean other than by plane is by boat. And the Widener family, they were some of the richest people in the whole world, so they wanted a super special boat to get them across the Atlantic.
Any guesses as to what that was?
Well,
Does anyone know the story?
we can give you some clues. So they wanted a really, really luxurious boat.
Probably not the Titanic.
Just you wait. So they wanted a super luxurious boat.
Oh.
They wanted a really safe boat. At the time, 1912, they were in luck because there was a boat that people were calling the safest boat, the most luxurious boat,
Indestructible.
the most indestructible
Wow,
boat
okay.
ever. And of course, that boat was
The RMS Titanic.
the
Oh,
Titanic.
really?
Yeah, so they took the Titanic and they were on the return voyage of the Titanic, going back to America. And so they were on the boat when it sunk. And I'm sure, as everyone knows, the Titanic hit a glacier in the northern
Yeah.
Atlantic Ocean. I mean, an iceberg.
Yeah.
And went down. But fortunately for the Widener family, they had lifeboats. They had access to lifeboats because they were like first-class passengers. And so the story goes that they were all on one of these lifeboats when
Harry Elkins Widener realized that he had left some of his very rare text back in his cabin. So he, as he was hopping on the lifeboat, realized this and had to go back and get some of them. So he ran back. His father went to help him to grab the rest of the text to bring back and survive and rescue on the lifeboat. And their mother, Eleanor Widener, never saw either of them again. They passed away in the sinking of the Titanic. Very tragic story. So Eleanor Widener, now a widow who has lost her son, came back, was rescued on a lifeboat, and back in America wanted to honor her son in some way. He was a bibliophile, he loved books, he loved Harvard, he loved his experience here. So she thought there would be no better way to honor him than by donating a few $1 million, which at the time is a crazy millions of dollars now, to Harvard for the construction of this library, the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library. And there were a few stipulations she gave with this money. One of them
was that she was really skeptical of what Harvard would do with this library, because before Widener Hall, called Gore Hall, and then when she gave all of her money, Harvard was like, ooh, sorry, Gore family, your building's gone. So they demolished this library to make way for her library, and she was smart enough to realize that she didn't want that to happen to Widener Library, so she made Harvard agree to never alter any brick, stone, or mortar on the face of this building. So what you're seeing now is the exact original design down to the brick and it's exactly how you would have seen Widener Library when it was first completed in 1914, and it will be like that forever. Harvard can't do anything with this building in terms of its exterior design, and it's here as long as the university will be around. Another stipulation was
that Harry Elkins Widener's personal study would be recreated in its exact form from their house inside the library. So this is another thing that unfortunately without an ID you can't fully go to. But if you walk inside, go directly back, you would come to his exact study recreated in the library with a portrait of him and also with a Gutenberg Bible open and right there in the introduction of the room. I do not know if anyone's familiar, but the Gutenberg Bible is one of, if not the most rare books that you can have. It was the first text to be printed in the sort of with the modern printing press way, and yeah, is very rare. One of the only two copies to still be alive and found today. It is said to be someone's job to turn one page of the Bible every single day inside the study.
And so the final thing that Eleanor really wanted, much like turning a page of the Bible a day, she wanted Harry to be remembered by placing fresh flowers at his desk every day. And so I've checked, the librarians are really good about it. They place a fresh bouquet of flowers right on Harry's desk every morning. And this allows us to kind of keep our memory of Harry fresh in our minds. And I think that it's just a wonderful touch. And as I go back and kind of think about the people who've really impacted our university, not only through their collections and their donations, but their lives' work, their athletic contributions, and just how they've changed this world. I always think of the Widener family just because so much of my academic experience, for better or for worse, has been spent studying in this library. But I also always think of our original guy, John Harvard, who donated our first 400 or so books and really got us started on the path to where we are today. So for our final stop before we close up this tour, we're going to be going and seeing and learning a little bit more about the John Harvard statue. But before we go, of course, does anyone have any questions?
We'll have lots of time to take pictures with the statue after.
Okay.
So really quickly, I wanted to just say, we were just talking about the Widener family, one of the wealthiest families in America at the time. I before coming here, sort of had this perception of Harvard as only being for the elite of, the American sort of population, citizens, that you had to have money and some sort of status to be able to come here. My experience here has told me totally the contrary. I think that is a part of Harvard's history, but that in today's experience of Harvard, you meet people from all over the world, from all ranges of socioeconomic backgrounds. Once again, like I quickly mentioned when we were talking about financial aid and President Drew Faust's sort of revamping of it, that I definitely would not be here if it wasn't for the financial aid program. So if you were to pay full tuition to come here, does anyone know how much?
60,000.
It's actually a bit more.
Yeah.
65. So if you're paying for room, board, so living here, eating here, classes, everything. It's a private school, so that usually raises the rates. So you're paying somewhere between $65,000 and $70,000 a year. That's crazy. I spent 2 summers ago in Paris. They paid nothing for college.
Yeah.
I want to go there.
Or Germany.
But yes, once again, all this to say that the financial aid program is extremely generous, and the general idea of the admissions process. So you're admitted without any look at your financial situation. After you're enrolled in the college, they then sort of deal with your finances, and if your financial situation will be any sort of limit to you coming here, they will take care of you, and very generous in that respect to American citizens, international citizens. everyone. So I just wanted to throw that out since we were just talking about the Widener family, very wealthy family. There's sort of a stereotype of a Harvard student, but just wanted to sort of demystify that, because you will find that that's not the actual experience at all. Yeah, so now let's talk about the John Harvard statue. So someone earlier was saying that this is the statue of 3 lies.
Yeah.
So we like to call it the statue of 3 lies. So makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. So actually on the front written or actually before this, let me say a few other things. This is the 3rd most photographed statue in the country,
Yeah.
behind the Statue of Liberty, New York City, and the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Has anyone seen the Lincoln Memorial
Yeah.
in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
So you would know that John Harvard over here sitting on his chair actually looks quite a bit like Abraham Lincoln sitting on his chair in that memorial. And that's no coincidence. This was sculpted by the same sculptor, Daniel Chester French. You can see his name there on the side. It was actually moved in the past 50 years to right here in front of University Hall at the center of Harvard Yard. And yeah, so that's a little bit of background. So now back to the Statue of 3 Lies. On the front, it reads, John Harvard, founder, 1638. So does anyone have any ideas of what some of those lies are?
2 years of the construction.
Sorry?
2 years of the construction.
Yeah, so the date, the year, that's one of the lies. So 1638 was not when the school was founded.
Yeah.
It was 1636, 2 years prior. Yes, so that's one of the lies. Any guesses on the second lie?
And John Harvard is not the
He
founder.
was not the founder. If you remember, members of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, some of the first American settlers founded the college.
Yeah.
And John Harvard came 2 years later and was one of the earliest benefactors, donating his land and books to the school. So that is the 2. And the 3rd and most surprising of all the lies,
That's not.
the John Harvard statue
Is not.
is not John Harvard. That's not John Harvard.
Not at all.
And my buddy Nathan will tell you why that is.
Uh-huh.
All right, so so right now, when they were building the statue, when they were trying to figure out, and Daniel Chester French was trying to find a model for the statue, he wasn't looking at depictions of John Harvard or paintings of John Harvard because none exist. We have no idea what John Harvard looked like, and they didn't know back in the late 1800s. And would anyone like to guess why we wouldn't know? It's not that there were never any paintings made of him. At one time in our school's history, we had a ton of paintings of him, and then they all kind of, something happened.
Yeah.
They burnt.
They burned
exactly.
it.
Harvard
So
Hall, yeah.
every single painting of John Harvard on Earth
Oh.
was in Harvard Hall at the time it burnt down. So really unlucky on our end. And so they needed to find a really handsome guy to be John Harvard, and they chose a student here. His name was, he was a student in the 1870s. His name was
Oh.
Sherman Hoare, and they chose him for a couple special reasons. Number one, just a wonderful, great-looking guy, just the typical Harvard student. Just very stately. And then also another interesting detail is that his great uncle was one of our first presidents of the university. His name was Leonard, and he is perhaps the most widely hated person in all of Harvard's history. He was a brutal president. He was really tough on discipline to like a kind of crazy extent. He actually, there's very little that survives from his presidency in the historical record, because back when he was president, there was only like 30 people at Harvard. But the only story that really survives of his presidency is that he had 2 students publicly beaten right in the middle of the yard, so like a couple meters from where we're standing, by members of the Cambridge Police Department. So he wasn't a very nice guy. And so a lot of the historical record is negative. However, he did start off our university off as like a science university. He established the first greenhouses at Harvard College, and as a person who studies plant biology, I'm very thankful for that. And so by the 1870s, the college was thinking, it's kind of time to honor Leonard and maybe we'll use his son for a model. And so at Harvard, this was kind of a weird thing to do because generally speaking, we honor our earliest presidents by naming upperclassmen houses after them. So, Parker lives in Quincy House, but they didn't think that it would be a good idea to, name a house after our president because he was so brutal, but also because
his last name was Whore, so
Yeah.
a whorehouse.
yeah, we didn't want that. So yeah, we didn't want a President Leonard whorehouse on campus. So instead, they decided to make a statue. So it isn't actually John Harvard.
Okay.
In fact.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sort of two final things we like to talk about the John Harvard statue. There's two crests on each side. So on the other side, you can check it out after this, is a crest for Emmanuel College, which was a sub-college from Cambridge University, which was John Harvard's alma mater. So that was actually sort of a cool coincidence I forgot to mention earlier. If you remember, this was Newtown, Massachusetts, and Newtown College. So that same year, 1638, when Newtown College was renamed Harvard College, Newtown, Massachusetts was renamed Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where we are now. And that was named after the University of Cambridge in England, sort of the sister brother school to Harvard. And it's just very coincidental that was John Harvard's alma mater. Sort of a cool connection there. So that's on the other side. On this side, you have the Harvard Crest, which again, we were just talking about on the Widener Library. You see everyone touching the foot here for good luck. So you see the crest there. It says Veritas in Latin for truth, but one little thing is different. Does anyone see that? Maybe have a guess as to what that is? The third book. Yeah, so if you remember, the crest normally is our buddy with the sweatshirt. See? You can see all the books are facing out.
Yeah.
But on this crest, one of the books is facing in. And so there's various interpretations of this. One is just that it was easier to sculpt because it's three letters, TAS, that it was easier to do that with the back binding of the book as opposed to the sort of center seam when faced out. But I would like to think that the sculptors were probably more advanced than that and could have taken care of that with the open book. So sort of the main interpretation that I like to talk about, that I think a lot of students here sort of believe to be true, is that it represents this larger sort of idea and notion of the school that while you're at Harvard and anywhere in the world, you can learn a lot from the books, you can learn a lot from your classes and from school, but at a certain time you have to put the book down, you have to get out of the classroom, and a lot of real learning and growth comes from that. So it's sort of a cool way to wrap up everything we've been talking about while here. You have to go to Annenberg and make new friends and, really reach out and explore and, hear new histories and new stories from your classmates. One of my friends just walked by. He lived on my freshman floor my first year. He's from Bahrain. I did not know that this country existed before coming to Harvard, and now one of my good friends is from Bahrain. 2 summers ago, I spent the summer in France through a Harvard summer program. So much growth and learning came from just exploring that city that, happened when putting the book down. So yeah, it's sort of a cool, nice note to end our tour on. A lot of special things about this place come from the classes and the books you can read and all of that, but there's so much more magic that comes from just talking to the people and making new friends with your classmates and all of that. So it's sort of a cool note if Nathan doesn't have anything else to end our tour on, and we'd like to thank you all for being such a wonderful group.
Thank you.
Thank you.